I'd like to welcome the radio audience, City Club members and their guests to the regular Friday program of the City Club of Portland. I'm Mary Kramer, president of the club. Our first order of business today is to introduce our new members. I'll ask them to stand as I call their names, and I'll ask you to hold your applause until after all have been introduced. First, we have Paul Anthony, Administrative Assistant, Lucretia Gardner and Associates. Michael Riley, President, Riley and Associates. Margaret Van Vliet, Income Property Loan Officer, First Interstate Bank of Oregon. Sharon Williams, Attorney, Sorensen, Jolnick, Turbo, and Kosh. And let's please give them a round of applause. We're glad you're here. I'd also like to thank the City Club members who recruited these folks. Lucretia Gardner, Cynthia Larson, and Kevin McMurdo. We appreciate your hard work. We have several announcements today. First of all, 1 week from today, Friday, September 7, Harry Lonsdale, Democratic challenger for the U.S. Senate seat held by Mark Hatfield, will appear in an empty chair debate. According to City Club policy, in the event that one candidate declines the club's invitation to appear, the other candidate who elects to appear will be given the opportunity to speak without opposition. Senator Hatfield has declined our invitation. We'll be at the Benson Hotel, the Mayfair Room. 2 weeks from today, on Friday, September 14th, Ted Savinar, nationally known Portland artist, will speak on what it means to work as a professional artist in America today. He is co-creator of the stage production Talk Radio, which became a movie and was directed by Oliver Stone. His artwork appears in the permanent collection of the New York City's Museum of Modern Art and the Smithsonian's American Archives. I do hope you had a chance to read this week's bulletin. City Club and Merrillhurst College have joined forces this fall to offer a dynamic, real-world learning experience for City Club members and Merrillhurst College students. The Merrillhurst course, based on City Club's Friday programs, will begin on September 20th and run through November 30th. This is an issue-based course, and as students come to our Friday programs, they will then adjourn to the club's office where they will have a seminar. The teacher of this seminar is State Representative Mike Burton, Assistant to the President of Merrillhurst. Whenever possible, our speakers will join the discussion. Graduate and undergraduate credit is available for this 3-credit course. Enrollment will be limited to 20. If you should be interested in registering for this course, you should call Merrillhurst Student Services at 636-8141. Let me give you that number again, just for clarification. 636-8141. Our board host today, seated at my far right, is Marge Abbott, member of the Board of Governors and president of M. Abbott and Associates. She has the privilege of asking the first question. The second question today will be asked by Judith Heath, member of the Arts and Culture Standing Committee. After the program, we do open to City Club members' questions. There will be 2 mics on the floor, and preference is given to those people who have the courage to go to the mic. Should you want to write a written question, the forms are on the table. Fill them out. Hold them up high so that the club staff can see you, and they'll pick them up and bring them to the podium. Now for today's program. Oregon Benchmarks, Charting Oregon's Future. Tom Peters, in Thriving on Chaos, states that there is no such thing as a good strategic plan. There is only a good strategic planning process, which includes getting everyone involved and rigorous debate. Involvement and debate is what Oregon Benchmarks is all about. Our state's strategic plan, Oregon Shines, describes the opportunities Oregon has to achieve sustained economic prosperity while enhancing our quality of life. Many states have strategic plans, but Oregon is the first state to take the next step. Oregon Benchmarks highlights our goals that we can use in measuring our progress. The question now is, do Oregon agree with these goals? Can we sustain the effort to monitor our progress? With us today, we have the Oregon Progress Board member, Gussie McRobert, and Duncan Wyse, Executive Director of the Oregon Progress Board. Ms. McRobert is also Mayor of Gresham. She holds a BA and an MA in Communication and owns RX Communications. She has a long history of volunteer public service. For example, she served on the Gresham Park Commission, Multnomah County Planning Commission, and Metro's Regional Growth Management Task Force, to name only a few. Duncan Wyse, an Oregonian, a native Oregonian, holds a BA in economics from Pomona College and an MBA from Stanford Business School. Before returning to Oregon, he served as executive director for the state of California's Public Utility Commission. His first position in Oregon was manager of policy and strategic planning for our state's economic development department. In that position, he helped create Oregon Shines, an economic strategy for the Pacific century. Ms. McRoberts will speak first. Duncan Wyse will talk to us in the middle, and then Ms. McRobert will close for us. Please join me in welcoming them both.
We are very pleased to be invited to this prestigious group to talk with you about the Oregon benchmarks. As Mary said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how this came into being, something about the board, and then what it means to us from a policy point of view, and then Duncan will get into the technical nuts and bolts of how this works. Also, as she said, this is a first for Oregon, a first in the nation as well. It is a real experiment. It's a venture into accountability where our state is willing to step up and make some goals and then measure itself to see whether they are accomplishing those goals. And I have to say that as an elected official, I think it is the most innovative thing to happen at any level of government in a very long time. And I hate to just put just a little tiny, even the tiniest negative note on this, but how many of us have heard these various stories of yet one more study being done on one more issue that ends up on a shelf someplace gathering dust. You never see it again. In fact, within the state system itself, dealing with this, there has been a little reluctance with the change in leadership at the top to take it seriously until they got into it and saw what it was about, and then have really worked with it. But that just has been, unfortunately, not a very uncommon thing, that we do studies and then we don't hold ourselves accountable for having accomplished those things. So the Oregon benchmarks, in essence, is a report card. It measures our state's progress in the areas of people and quality of life and public finance. And it is a guarantee, as much as we can make a guarantee, that Oregon Shines, the state's economic strategy for the next 20 years for the Pacific century, will not become just a dust collector. And it is the very first attempt in the nation to accomplish this. And I guess that means that we probably will make some missteps, and we will go back and make some changes, but at least we have taken that first step. The Oregon Progress Board, of which I'm a member, is responsible for creating the report card, for issuing the grades, and for identifying ways to make it work. And we do that in a variety of ways, talking to staff people all around the state in various departments. But we also are in a process of talking to the people in this state because they have good ideas and can help us make this work. The Progress Board was mandated by the legislature. Its members are appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate, which was kind of an interesting experience. And the board, by statute, has to be chaired by the governor, which brings up the board's future in this election year. And Oregon Progress Board and all three, the Oregon benchmarks, were the concept of Governor Neil Goldschmidt. But it will not end with his decision not to be a candidate for our next governor, because both the Oregon Progress Board and the benchmarks have been endorsed by both gubernatorial candidates. The board is nonpartisan. We have enough Republicans that some Democrats have complained, and we have enough Democrats that some Republicans have complained, so we must have just the right balance. John Gray is our vice chair. He certainly needs no introduction to this group. But for those in radial land in the southern parts of the state, John Gray is chairman of Graco Resources, former chairman of Omark Industries, and the developer of Salishan and Sun River Resorts. Peggy Tim is Baker County Treasurer. She was former Baker City Councilor, and she is the president of Oregon Trail Electric. Robert Chandler from Bend is the editor of The Bulletin, the newspaper there. He is also chairman of Western Communications, Inc., and he is the board's resident curmudgeon and political historian. He knows every story about every elected official in the state, I swear, for years and years back. And it makes the meetings very, very interesting when you hear the real reasons behind some of those decisions that you might have wondered about. He's fun. Ed Whitelaw is from Eugene. He's an economics professor at the University of Oregon, president of Eco Northwest, an economic consulting firm. And Ed is the one who holds each of these things up like a diamond and looked at each facet and says, now why do we know this? It's kind of like Steve Bauer from Portland, if you know Steve. He's a delight to work with. Irv Fletcher from Woodburn is president of the AFL-CIO, formerly with State Corrections and Employment Divisions. Dr. Matthew Proffitt from Portland, superintendent of the Portland Public Schools. Dr. Diane Williams is from Ashland. She is a pediatrician at the Medford Clinic, and she is a leader in southern Oregon and also state healthcare issues. It's a very diverse group. It's sometimes a handful, as Duncan can tell you, but you have to remember that this is a group that's charged with standing up and saying, wait, we're not headed in the right direction here. So I guess they didn't want a group of extremely polite and passive sort of folks because we are charged with speaking up to keep this progress on track. The governor's charge to us is to aim high but stay focused. And I'll tell you, as a mayor of a city whose population has doubled in the last 10 years, and we expect another 30,000 in the next 15 years, that it is very important for the state to be clear and focused on the way it does business. Because Oregon shines and Oregon benchmarks will drive state priorities. I was looking through the state legislative calendar the other day, the various committees, and already I see that Duncan has been talking to the Housing Committee, the Education and Social Services Planning Committee. And what that should translate to, if this all works, is more effective state-local partnerships. And let me give you just a quick couple of examples. If clean water is one of our goals, and we have a benchmark for that, we have a situation in East Multnomah County. Most of our industrial land is in South Shore. It has high groundwater. There is some pollution problems there. And before we embark on a major recruiting effort to draw companies there, we could use some technical assistance from the state in how best to locate that. From the other aspect, I hope as we get out and about and elected officials become more familiar with this, that the benchmarks themselves will be used by city councils and county commissions, certainly Metro, the regional governments around, to help them in their planning so that we're all doing the same thing. It's an exciting concept. The benchmarks address at the policy level the things that we need to do during the next 20 years to have a world-class workforce, an unspoiled environment, and a global view of commerce and culture. Duncan is going to give a slide presentation and talk about the more technical aspects, get right down to the nitty-gritty here.
Thank you, Gussie. You are right. The Progress Board is a real handful. As I try to put the agenda together for the Progress Board meetings once a month, I watch them shredded every meeting as the Progress Board itself roams over the policy landscape. Thank you for, along with Gussie, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to talk before you today. Before I present Oregon benchmarks, I need to step back and describe its forerunner, Oregon Shines, for the two reports are really quite interconnected. However, before discussing either, I want to step back further yet, for the seeds of both of these efforts can be traced right back here to you and the City Club. In August 1987, the City Club adopted a report entitled A Competitive Economic Strategy for Oregon. Much of the work we are presenting today was recommended in that report just 3 years ago. So, if you like what we're doing, you can proudly take some credit. On the other hand, if you're unhappy with these efforts, you might think of us as children gone astray and give us some suggestions for improvement. The City Club's economic strategy is a remarkable document, especially as I look back at it today. Developed under the leadership of Ogden Beeman, it shows once again what can happen when smart, disinterested, unpaid citizens innocently take on a complex public policy issue. The embarrassingly simple yet seldom asked questions are raised, and in this case, a clear and very helpful insight followed. Indeed, the report is so prophetic of what I'm going to present today, I can't help from quoting it. It begins, quote, "The first step in any strategic economic development effort is to determine what kind of economic development Oregonians want. If we cannot measure or describe or don't know what we're trying to accomplish, it is too easy to fund a few new programs, announce a new plant or two, but not truly influence the economic progress of the state. Oregon needs a statewide consensus on a specific set of economic development goals and criteria against which to measure progress towards them." The ideas here seem simple enough, yet few of the state economic plans from around the country we've looked at actually spell out their goals, and none, until now, have a measurement system to track performance. The City Club further found that the state and local governments affect competitiveness in many ways. The report stressed that economic development goes far beyond the boundaries of what are labeled economic development departments or programs, and highlighted the importance of education, infrastructure, social services, taxes, and regulatory policy to our economic future and our economic vitality. And the report concluded that only the governor has the clout and visibility to develop a comprehensive economic strategy, and suggested that he do so. The report is pretty much the blueprint for what we've been doing up to this moment, so let me give you a report on progress. The City Club recommended the governor develop an economic strategy. The governor did just that in June of 1988 when he asked about 150 Oregon leaders to come up with the document that became known as Oregon Shines, which was released in May last year. Before summarizing Oregon Shines, let me define what I mean by a strategic plan, for like so many other fields, this is a subject that tends to be fogged by jargon. A strategic plan, any strategic plan, whether it's for General Motors or the corner grocery store, should ask and answer three basic questions. Where are we? Where do we want to be? And how do we get there? Let me summarize how Oregon Shines answers those questions. First of all, where are we? There's good news about Oregon and its economy. In terms of job growth, we're rebounding. For those who remember the early 80s, when we experienced the worst recession since the Great Depression, can focus a little on that? Excuse me, Ogden, would you mind focusing on? Since the Great Depression, losing jobs and people, this is good news indeed. Oregon is one of the most rapidly growing states today. It's also good news that Oregon has rebounded statewide. Economic growth is not just a Portland phenomenon. Indeed, parts of central and southern Oregon have been growing more rapidly than the metro overall. While there are still many smaller communities throughout the state that aren't doing so well, we see a broadly based economic expansion in the major regions of the state. As we take a longer view of Oregon and its economy, it's important to note that we've been diversifying. Just after World War II, forest products made up about 60% of manufacturing employment. Today it represents about 37%, with high technology and other diversified manufacturing moving from 20 to 50% of manufacturing employment. We've also experienced strong growth in professional services and tourism, further spreading our economic base. Diversification is important. Economies grow in stages, and those that don't diversify tend to stagnate. When we think about why we've been diversifying, we can see that we have some major competitive advantages. First of all, we've got a terrific location. Once we were an isolated part of North America, today we're connected with the Pacific Rim and with two enormous economies to the north and south and markets across the Pacific. Second, it's a wonderful place to live. When you ask companies why they're in business here, especially high-tech companies, they know Oregon's quality of life. We've got to recognize quality of life is an advantage for attracting the people we need to build the future we want in Oregon. We have other advantages as well. We're a competent, hard-working people. We've got a relatively affordable land base. We have a good natural resource base, and we're civic-minded citizenry willing to work together to build our future. All these advantages add up to a forecast, and the forecast is that Oregon is going to grow as we look ahead into the next century. If you take the long view on the Oregon economy, we've been growing since World War II, along with the rest of the western United States. The recession in the early 80s from this perspective was something of an aberration. We appear to be on track for growth as we enter the 90s. All is not rosy with Oregon and its economy, however. We have some concerns. The first concern is per capita income, perhaps the most important measure of economic well-being, as was spelled out in the City Club report. 3 years ago, the average wages of Oregonians have dropped in the 80s, and we are now about 90% of the national per capita income level. In addition, if you take a look at the largest manufacturing sector in the state, forest products, we can see a storm ahead. Even before the spotted owl controversy was raised, can you focus out a little, please. Even before the spotted owl controversy was raised, we expected some declines in forest products due to the general trends in that industry, declining harvests and productivity in the mills. With the set-asides for the spotted owl, many communities are going to face real trouble in the years ahead as they try to manage with this issue. Finally, as we looked at the foundations of economic growth, our basic infrastructure, the sewers, the water system, the roads, in the strategic planning process, what we found was a backlog of maintenance needs. Infrastructure spending in Oregon dropped by about 40% in the 80s. And as we enter the 90s, in a period of growth, when we need new infrastructure, we have to look at our basic foundations, and we've got a lot of catch-up to do. We've talked about our strengths. We as a state also have some weaknesses. We're a small state. We have some business costs that are too high in some areas. Workers' comp came up again and again in this process. We hope we fix that one. But there are other areas. We've got to be worrying about business cost containment in a range of areas. As we look to the global competition that we're going to be facing in the years ahead, we don't think the U.S. workforce and Oregon's workforce is at competitive levels with international competition. And finally, our research universities came up in this process. As we look at Oregon's research universities compared to those in the north and south of us, we're not up to the challenge of meeting the needs of the high-tech industry in Oregon. We've talked about Oregon and where we are. We also need to focus briefly, at least, on some of the changes that are going on around Oregon, because there are dramatic changes going on around us. And I just want to hit 3 of those changes. This is not I don't want to talk about all the trends and megatrends facing us, but there are some major changes. We need to think about what they mean for Oregon as a people. First change is internationalization. We know that we are truly in global competition today. We're in a global marketplace. Oregon companies compete globally, and we've got to think of ourselves in economic competition. While it provides some tremendous opportunities for the state in terms of reaching new markets and improving our trade flows, it's a challenge for our companies, it's a challenge for us as a state, and perhaps most important and least understood, it's a competitive challenge for us as a people and as individuals. For what we're finding in the new global marketplace is that those with low skills are getting low pay in the global marketplace that is emerging. Low-skilled jobs are moving to those parts of the world that pay the low wages. And the opportunities for earning and commanding high earnings in relatively low-skilled jobs just are disappearing throughout the economy. And as we look at our competitiveness internationally in terms of workforce quality, we have some disturbing data. In terms of math at the high school level, we're second from the bottom, just ahead of Thailand in a test that was given in about 14 or 15 countries around the world. In the sciences, we're at the bottom. In biology, in chemistry, we're third from the bottom. In physics, we're fifth. But again, in the international comparisons, we haven't been doing very well in the math or in the sciences. I'll come back to literacy in a moment. But again, as we look at international competitiveness, we don't look very good. So global competition is one trend that's affecting us. At the same time, the changes in technology are demanding more of people in terms of the skills needed to command high wages in the job. We're finding that the factories of the future are demanding high skills, high skilled labor, people talented in statistics, computer programming, and a range of other fields. We find that the advances in sciences and electronics, biotechnology, and so on are also demanding higher skilled labor to command the kind of wages that we want in the economy in Oregon in the future. All this comes together, I think, fairly nicely in one chart that describes the challenge that faces Oregon and America. We have some strong data to prove that the opportunities are relatively bleak for those with few skills in the society for the future. By looking at the real earnings of young male adults, 21 through 25 years old, we happen to have data for adults, not women. We can see the U.S. workforce, this is just the data, sorry, the U.S. workforce at two different points of time, in 1973, 1986, you can see what the trends, you can see what's going on in the economy. Between 73 and 1986, earnings for young adults with a college education dropped by about 10%. That's not too good. But the story gets worse for those with relatively less education. Earnings for those with some college dropped about 20% in that period. Interestingly, in 1973, those with just high school graduation earned more than college graduates as they entered the workforce. But by 1986, their earnings dropped by 40%. You can surmise that the blue-collar jobs that were available in 1973 were gone by 1986. And by 1986, those without high school degrees were generally earning poverty-level wages or less as they entered the workforce. What we see is that the economy that's emerged in Oregon and the United States is a lot less forgiving for those with relatively few skills than it was just 13 years ago. And we ignore all these trends really at our peril. So to summarize where Oregon is, we're going to grow as we look into the next century, we believe. However, there's some key issues that we need to face as we plan our economic future. First of all, will the growth provide well-paying jobs or third-world jobs? We can make a difference in that outcome depending on how we deal with our education and training programs, how well we connect those programs with industry. Second, will growth erode Oregon's quality of life or enhance it? Again, the trends in infrastructure suggest we may have a real problem with parks, schools, and a whole variety of other services unless we plan this issue carefully. Finally, is the growth going to occur statewide or only in our biggest cities? Again, that's a strategic issue we need to face given the trends in the forest products industry. So Oregon Shines talks about where we are. Let's talk briefly about where we want to be. Oregon Shines presents a vision for Oregon and its economy for 10 to 20 years out. And let me just summarize it as follows. First, the vision is that Oregon will continue to diversify, the kind of diversification that's been going on now for several decades. Second, and importantly, we want to see that diversification provide quality jobs, high-paying jobs that demand skills from Oregonians. Third, we envision that growth to enhance our quality of life, not detract from it, that we will build some of the fruits of economic growth will be used to provide the facilities we need to maintain a quality place here in Oregon. And finally, we visualize this growth occurring statewide. Each region will draw on its comparative advantages to build on economic opportunity. As suggested in the City Club report earlier, we needed to translate this vision into some goals. And the goals in Oregon Shines included raising per capita income, maintaining a strong middle class, maintaining an enviable quality of life, and stable or increasing job growth statewide. Interestingly, the goal that is at least implicit in most economic strategy efforts we've looked at, that is jobs, jobs, and more jobs, isn't the key goal in Oregon Shines. The quality is the goal, not quantity, for the Oregon strategy we're presenting here. Well, if that's where we want to be, how do we get there? What do we need to do now to build an attractive future for Oregon? As we suggested earlier, the future we visualize is no means inevitable for Oregon. We've got a lot of strategic issues to deal with. But if we play to our strengths, we think we can build a very attractive future. Oregon Shines proposes that Oregon distinguish itself in three ways, arguing that if we do, we'll be well positioned to achieve an advanced economy as we move into the next century. First, Oregon Shines propose that we take the steps to define ourselves as measurably the best educated and trained people in America by the year 2000, and probably a harder task, a workforce equal to any in the world by the year 2010. Given the trends facing Oregon and the United States, if we're serious about achieving higher levels of income over the next decade, education and training have to be an absolutely critical element of the plan. Second, Oregon Shines suggests that we build on our exceptional quality of life and use that as a competitive advantage. As California suffers from terminal bloat and with Seattle well on its way, Oregon Shines suggests that through wise management of urban design, outdoor recreation, and working on infrastructure, we have an opportunity to distinguish ourselves in this area. Third, we see the opportunity to distinguish ourselves as a people with an international frame of mind, a people that is connected with the world and able to see the global opportunities before us and build that into our business and cultural life. These elements come together in a framework we've called Oregon's Circle of Prosperity. And the logic of the circle goes like this. The state and the community is a major supplier of business. It provides workforce, neighborhoods, schools, streets, highways, and a variety of other services. If Oregon distinguishes itself as the place with an exceptional people, global-minded and well-educated, and is an exceptional place that deals with its infrastructure and has a sensitive business climate, that is the kind of place where diverse value-adding industry will thrive, the kind of industry that will pay well-paying jobs, provide well-paying jobs for our citizens. If we have that kind of economic growth going on in the state, that in turn will generate the funds we need for our schools and other services, which can then be used to reinforce our basic advantage. And the two sectors, in short, can help support each other to a very attractive future for the state. That's the framework we're proposing in Oregon Shines. With that framework in place, Oregon Shines, which is a thick document, about 200 pages, goes about trying to translate this framework of this broad strategy into some specific recommendations for a variety of departments and organizations throughout the state and in state government. It included over 200 recommendations, the bulk of which are being implemented. While all this is well and good, a more fundamental finding of Oregon Shines is that reports like this in themselves don't really work for building the state in the future we want. The problem is no such document, no matter how good, can ever identify, much less cause to be implemented, all that needs to be done to build our future. So, recognizing this, Oregon Shines proposed, and the legislature created a new organization, the Oregon Progress Board, and gave it the mission of keeping us focused on the future. And it asked the board to produce a new tool, Oregon Benchmarks. The concept behind the benchmarks harkened back to the City Club's report. Translate our vision and strategies into measurable goals for Oregon. Benchmarks we can use to focus programs and our policies and our budgets. Benchmarks we can use to applaud success and alert ourselves to failure. That is what we've set out to do. In developing the benchmarks, the Progress Board thought it would be important to receive a lot of public comment on the report. To help focus the comment, the board decided to ask Gussie, McRobert, and about 30 other citizens to put together a public review draft, which we have for you today as you leave. Oregon Benchmarks is organized around the circle of prosperity we presented to you earlier. What we do is take each element of the circle of prosperity and design a set of measures which would reflect achievement of those elements. So let me illustrate how this would work. Take the issue of exceptional people. Oregon Shines identifies it as a key goal, and we want to be the best educated and trained people in America by the year 2000, equal to any in the world by the year 2010. We know that to achieve an exceptional people, we know that parents and families are important to the future of their children, and we know that many children today are growing up in conditions that place them in risk of failure. So you'll find in the benchmarks a set of measures relating to the conditions of the family. One such measure, for example, is the number of teenage women who are giving for the birth rate of teenage women. In this case, we find that the risk of unhappy outcomes for both the moms and children are very high, and the benchmarks propose a goal of cutting the number of teenage pregnancies in half by the year 1995. We know that the condition of babies at birth are in some cases disheartening. For example, in Oregon, we know that about 4.6% of births in Oregon are from moms who are addicted to some form of illegal drugs, and the outcomes for those kids are just potentially disastrous. Oregon Benchmarks propose to drop that to 1% by the year 2000, proposes to drop it to 0 by the year 2010. The benchmarks work through different stages of human development. We propose to have a measure of the percentage of 6-year-olds who are ready to learn to help evaluate how we're doing in our social service, children's agenda, and other programs in the early childhood years. We know that the high school graduation rate in Oregon is too low. It's about 74%. The benchmarks propose a set of goals to raise that to 92% by the year 2000 and 95% by the year 2010. We also know that performance in high school is important. As I illustrated earlier, we're concerned about how we're doing on international tests. As we develop national assessments of high school performance, we propose to set a very ambitious goal for Oregon. We want to be #1 in the national assessments. We're #2 in SAT. We don't think that is an unrealistic goal. We want to set a goal for ourselves to be #1 on education performance. All the results of education efforts and social service efforts should result in adults who are capable and able to work in a modern society, and that deals with the issue of basic literacy skills. We don't yet have an assessment of Oregon's literacy at the adult levels. We will by the end of the year. That's because the Progress Board, for the first time, has gone out and administered a test for 2,000 Oregonians to assess what our literacy levels are in Oregon. We don't have it for Oregon yet, but we do have the results of this test administered nationwide, and I just want to give you a flavor of what it shows. In the area of basic literacy, the kinds of questions, locate a particular intersection on a street map. About 84% of young adults can answer that question. Find gross pay year to date on a pay slip. About 84% can answer that correctly. Locate information in a sports article. 75%. Gives you a flavor of how well people do on basic literacy. The level of intermediate literacy, enter 4 items and calculate a checkbook balance. About 60% can handle that kind of a question. Using directions on a street, follow directions on a street map, about 57% can handle that kind of a question in this adult survey. At the level of advanced literacy, state in writing the main argument from a newspaper article, about 25% could handle that. Determine a tip at a given percentage, 22% could handle that. So that's bad news here today. And finally, nobody can use a bus schedule, it turns out, about 21%, and that kind of. So this gives you a portrait, if you will, of what the adult population looks like in the United States. This is young adults. As I say, we don't have this for Oregon yet. We will by the end of the year, and we'll be the first state to do so. And we'll be able to build this kind of data into the benchmarks that we want. And in the document, in the draft we have, we set the goal to be substantially better than at least the young adults. We propose to be at 98% in basic literacy, 85% in intermediate literacy, and 45% in advanced literacy in Oregon by the year 2010. We will obviously calibrate these as when we get better information about where we are in Oregon in the adult workforce. So what we're portraying here then is a set of benchmarks that cover the full range of human development. The report has a lot of other benchmarks. And again, it's a way to assess how we're doing as a society at bringing up our children and meeting the needs of an advanced economy and an advanced society. The benchmarks include a set of measures in a lot of other categories, and I just want to briefly touch on the other categories. We have a section on extraordinary place, quality of life goals, air quality, crime goals, housing goals. We have a set of goals on public services. How are we doing on basic infrastructure, the water, sewer system, transportation system? We have a set of goals on business climate, the workers' comp rates, healthcare costs, a range of measures in that area. We have finally a set of goals on the economy. How are we doing in terms of increasing our per capita income, increasing the strength of our middle class, increasing the diversification of Oregon and its economy? Will all these goals add up to a different future? We don't know. It's a new idea here. But the whole idea behind this is it follows back to that old adage that if you don't know where you're going, you're not likely to get there. And with Oregon benchmarks, at least we'll know where we're going, and we'll see whether we can get there. Gussie.
Very briefly, this is a rough draft. We hope you will take the copies of the benchmarks with you, and we're holding meetings all around the state. We want to know what you think, and we are very honest about making the changes that you suggest. And thank you again for having us here.
Marge Abbott, member of the board, has the pleasure of the first question. Marge?
Thanks very much for a very interesting speech. You ended up crossing out several of my questions as you went along. One of the things you said that one of the goals of this project was more effective state-local cooperation. And you've also mentioned the fact that the gubernatorial candidates have both endorsed your work. But what kind of interaction have you had with with local governments, such as the city of Portland, and which is what I'm most familiar with? And so what is the relationship between the work you've done on the benchmarks and projects such as the Portland Civic Index or the Portland Future Focus that are going on right now?
Well, first let me talk briefly about the review process. We have mailed this out to about 400 institutions. Certainly all the local governments have received copies. In developing the benchmarks, in this case the City of Portland was involved. Steve Bauer was a member of the committee that Gussie had on infrastructure, so they're quite aware of this. We've been looking at their material, both the Future Focus and the Civic Index, to help define this, and we hope they'll take a hard look at this and give us some reactions as well.
Judith Heath, member of the Standing Committee on Arts and Culture.
Human Services. Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. I actually have two questions. To me, I've worked in strategic planning for a long time, and to me, benchmarks implies that someone is held accountable. Who do you envision being accountable for achieving these benchmarks? Since the governor serves as chair of the commission, is he the politician ultimately accountable? And my second question is, we have a property tax limitation on the ballot this year. If that passes, how feasible will some of our goals be?
Ultimately, the elected officials are held accountable. I mean, that's the way the real world works. If you don't like their answers and what's happening, you throw them out. So yes, ultimately the governor is the one, because the governor directs the agencies, and the legislature has something to do with that too.
I don't know.
Both of us will.
I guess I think we're all, governor is certainly one person, but I think we're all accountable to these benchmarks. I mean, these are benchmarks for us. They're our goals for our state. And obviously, when we're talking about the future of Oregon, we're all involved. And the point of this is to help us focus on where we want to be and then keep track. And I think we'll all be using it as we go to try to define our future and measure how we're doing.
If POPs passes, of course, it will be a challenge, but I'll tell you, there is never a more important time to have sorted through your priorities than when you are in a real financial crunch. So it will be very helpful to the state to know where to spend their money if that passes.
Susan Stone, member of the club. As I understand it, one of your objectives is to raise the per capita income 10% above the national average for areas outside Portland. Now we're spending a lot of time and money trying to increase tourism in the state, which is not only seasonal but also low paying. Doesn't that fly directly in the face of what you're trying to accomplish?
Tourism is one part of the package. You know, you need a variety of things to accomplish that, and that's just one part. One thing, for example, that we need to start asking companies who want to locate here is, how much are you going to pay? Our new, at the state level, the new person, and I can't remember her name, but the person in charge of recruiting industries, one of the questions, the first thing she did when she arrived was change for the employment division, was how much money do you require to apply for this job and to accept it? And we have spent a lot of money recruiting companies that do not pay family wage jobs. That's something we need to take a very hard look at.
Bob Wheel, member. Somebody already asked the question I was handed, so I get to ask my own. You very correctly pointed out that Oregon operates in a global marketplace. Does the Oregon benchmark study take into account the possibility of a long, drawn-out conflict in the Persian Gulf or elsewhere? Is any thought being given to possible breaks in the beautiful Oregon Circle?
Well, of course, there are lots of events we certainly cannot forecast, but there's a lot we have control of in Oregon. We're not the notion that we are at sea in a world that we can't affect is really not a very good picture of what we've got here. We affect education, we affect infrastructure and quality of life. Both of those are crucial to our economic future and our future as a citizenry. So while there certainly are going to be forces hitting us that we can't predict. We think the basic trends suggest what we need to be working on, and we think the benchmarks measure what we ought to be evaluating ourselves under.
And we can't stop planning when we have world crises. I mean, we will always have a world crisis of one kind or another, and the state can't go on hold until they get their problem solved.
Okay. Jean DeMaster, City Club member. Under the quality of life benchmark, you talk about basic human services, and there is a benchmark in there for elderly people who are disabled. My question is, will there be a benchmark for people who are not elderly but are disabled, and will you include untreated alcoholism and drug abuse as a disability?
Well, it is. And I'll tell you the truth, I am a part-time mayor who has a full-time job, and so Duncan knows the individual nuts and bolts parts of the benchmarks better than I do. Let's have him answer that.
I hope we'll be receiving those kind of comments. This again is a draft. I think I've heard that more than once when we issue this, and I think we will want to have some kind of a measure. Is my guess that the board will want to include such a measure. I'm not sure what exactly it will be.
People send in more comments indicating where those need to be made?
Yes, and we're receiving a lot of comments. We hope we'll receive more from you and others as this process, as we complete our process, but we are really looking for ideas on how to improve this report, and that's an area where I think it does need improvement.
We're taking a lot of notes as we travel around the state.
I'm Don Wagner, member of City Club, and I've got two questions. First of all, if we want to get the Oregon Shines, which sounds very interesting, but I see that in addition, is that possible to obtain that?
Oh, sure.
Okay. And secondly, obviously, this your presence here today is an effort to kind of let everybody know what's going on. I'd just be interested to know what else you're going to do to let Oregon as a whole know what's happening, and then how do you what do you do next?
Okay. Well, in terms of the review of the benchmarks, we're having hearings or workshops on it in 11 regions around the state, asking community leaders to respond to it. In addition, we're trying to broadcast it as widely as we can, and we're seeking comments from any citizen and certainly any organization on the benchmarks themselves. Where this goes when we're done at the end of the year is to the legislature. The legislature asked for this, and in the statute creating the board, they are going to review, modify, and adopt the benchmarks, and this will then become the measurement system for the state. Legislators have been involved in the regional workshops, and we're again trying to reach out and get as much in the way of public comment as we can on this document.
And we've had very good response from the meetings that we've held so far. A lot of people are interested, and they have a lot of good ideas for us, so we're hopeful.
John White, member. I think one key aspect to achievement of goals is attitude and motivation, and I wonder if you have any indication whether Oregonians have the motivation to achieve the goals that you've set out, and how our motivation compares to our competitors, either other states, other communities, or other nations.
What I hear people say is that they're very clear that although we have recovered in number of jobs from the recession, we are falling way behind as far as the income that those folks are using, and there is nothing better than lack of money to motivate people. And I tell you, even just having the name out there, I get calls at home about this program, which seems unlikely, but I do. I think Oregonians are different than, say, Duncan is a native Oregonian, but he recently worked in California. I think we do value what happens to this state, and I think that they will. I think that they will. That's all I can say.
In terms of participation, we really hope the City Club in its committees will take a hard look at this. Of course, as I mentioned at the outset, this is a document that in many ways was inspired by your organization. We think you ought to have a particular interest, and we'd welcome you to comment on it as an organization. We will also be having a workshop in Portland, and if any of you are interested, let us know.
I think it's the same attitude which makes us why we had the first bottle bill, the first land use system. I think Oregonians just do think about their state differently. I think we have a long history of that.
Joe Duran, City Club member. Although I haven't had a chance to read the entire report yet, I understand that some of the benchmarks are pretty vague, so vague that they may be difficult for you to measure and may not even have a lot of meaning. It's been told to me that one of the benchmarks has to do with maintaining a high percentage of Oregon forest land still used for forests. And it's not clear whether that includes federal, state, or private forest land. It's not clear whether a clear cut is a forest in the consideration of measuring this benchmark. It's not clear whether this gives license to timber operators to cut down old growth forests and do second growth, because this would still be a forest. Is there going to be an effort to make these goals a little clearer?
Well, all the benchmarks, when this is completed, should be measurable. That's the whole point of this. So in that example, this committee developing that was struggling on what the forest measure ought to be, and I think they came up with a proposal which definitely does need to be refined. But in terms of just the process, each benchmark, before we're done, we need a way of actually measuring numerically whether we're actually achieving it. And then on that specific question of the forest lands, that's a whole subject in of itself, but we're getting a lot of comments on what that ought to be.
One of the challenges of putting this together is the time crunch. The board was formed in February, March. The committees had 6 weeks to do their work. And that's why we are stressing over and over and over again that this is a rough draft, because we had to really set a timeline on those committees to get these comments back so that we can take it on the road to find out what people think, to have it ready by January 1 for the legislature. So this is going to be an ongoing refinement. There are some, that's one of the better ones. There are some others in there that I wonder, if they can be measured at all, or if they should be even.
Ray Polani, a member of the City Club. I wonder if the benchmarks are addressing the issue of quality of life versus way of life. I think there's quite a difference between the two. I'm thinking of our president sending the troops to Iraq to defend our way of life, and I'm thinking of the implication that might have for the quality of life. Has anything been done on that in the benchmarks? Maybe it's a topic you should consider.
Well, we certainly have no control over whether the president sends troops into Iraq, but I think all of these things address the quality of life. If you have clean air and clean water, and you have kids who can read, and you have workers who can compete in a global market and earn wages that they can support their family on, if we are aiming for a good public transportation system, for roads that can handle our growth, those are all quality of life issues. So maybe it's just a matter of definition.
Well, the way of life may be in contrast to the quality of life.
Ogden Beeman, City Club member. What's the chances of this concept spreading to other states throughout the nation if it's successful? And have you had inquiries from other venues about this program?
I think the answer is we're so focused on getting it done for Oregon. I haven't really spent any time at all talking with people in other states. I've looked at a lot of other state plans, and I've never seen anything like this. But as far as spreading the concept, I think it has a lot of appeal, but I haven't seen it. The best example of this I've heard was President Bush himself in the State of the Union address when he suggested we have measurable goals for education. He suggested that, but in terms of actually implementing them, nothing has really happened nationally nor in any other state. When we're done with the benchmarks, we will be the first state to have achieved that for Oregon, and having a set of measurable goals for social services and education to guide ourselves with.
It has received publicity in other states. We received a clipping from the Los Angeles Times about some of the activities of the board, so word is getting out. Maybe they want to wait and see if we are successful before they attempt it.
Ken Snyder, City Club member. Speaking as a mayor, would you address the issue that's been raised a couple of times of how is for example, the city of Gresham going to implement this kind of a program? How would you see that happening?
I would see it happening from the council level. We do goal setting each year, and I can see these ideas being included in those. And I've looked through and tried to compare what we're doing and where we're headed, and it's amazing how close we really are, which really pleases me. I think we have to talk to the elected officials, explain what we're about, and I don't think that Gresham is that different. I suspect that a lot of cities around the state are concerned about these same things. We have people, for example, included in the infrastructure committees, how to finance public infrastructure. The same on the tax structure. So we have staff involved. So do a lot of other cities.
Yes. We have time for one more question. The environmental permitting process in Oregon has been unpredictable and discouraging, even to companies with environmentally sound projects. What benchmarks are you developing in this area?
Well, we have a benchmark on permit streamlining. I believe, I've got to look it up for you. I don't have it, haven't memorized it. But in the business climate section, we have one on streamlined permitting, number 9. And it's the average number of days required to obtain a siting or expansion permit as a percentage of the 1990 level. I don't know if that's the right measure. The committee working on this really struggled with that one because it's very hard to define what we mean by a streamlined system. But that is an area where we're trying to come up with a goal. How long does it take to get something done through the permitting process and be a worthy area to have a benchmark for?
Well, here's another one. How do you plan to attract high-paying jobs to our rural areas?
Well, I think it's the same answer in many ways as the urban area. It starts with quality workforce and education policy, and I think having the kind of talent and access to training programs makes a difference in the rural areas as much as in the urban areas. Programs like EdNet, which brings through telecommunications training outside the major urban areas, is an example of how we need to move in the state if we're serious about bringing high-paying jobs all around the state.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
And the other aspect of that is that basically it's also a land use question, because we are beginning to grapple with the concept of finite growth in this state. We have urban growth boundaries. How are those going to be expanded? If, for example, if we hold firm in the Portland area, then will the next wave of growth happen in McMinnville and Sandy and Estacada and in Yamhill counties? So part of that just simply depends on how we choose as a state and as a region to allow growth to happen. Are we going to keep expanding urban growth boundaries and end up a megalopolis where you can't tell where one city begins and the other ends? There's all different kinds of ways to do that, and we're just now beginning to ask those questions. So I think that's a big part of it.
Please join me in thanking our speakers for a wonderful presentation today. We are adjourned.